So my name is Jenna. I'm going to be your host today. I'm a director at the Rumi Forum. The Rumi Forum is the host organization for this conference today. I'm going to tell you a little bit before we get started about the Rumi Forum. The Rumi Forum was founded in 1999 with the mission to foster interfaith and intercultural dialogue to stimulate thinking and exchange of opinions on supporting and fostering democracy and peace all over the world, and to provide a platform for education and information exchange. So today, we are kicking off our Social Issues Conference series with the conference Education and the State of Our Future Critical Issues Facing Our Children. And I want to just give you a little synopsis today on our conference. This conference aims to highlight critical social, pedagogical, and civic issues as they relate to the pre-K to 12 U.S. educational systems in the 21st century. Early education and K through 12 areas will be discussed today in light of causes, effects, and in particular, solutions at a local and national level. So as we get started this morning, I would like to first introduce, for some welcoming remarks, the president of the Rumi Forum. Emra Celik, president of the Rumi Forum, Mr. Celik has a degree in computer engineering and a master's degree in teaching. He is currently in his 5th year in DC. Previously, he lived in Australia for 37 years, and he has been involved in educational and intercultural-based projects for the last 20 years. So please welcome Emra Celik.
Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Rumi Forum, I want to sincerely welcome you all to our new annual Social Issues Conference series with this year's title, Education and the State of Our Future, Critical Issues Facing Our Children. In 2014, the Rumi Forum celebrates 15 years of serving the community by way of various events covering themes of diversity and social inclusion, peace building, social justice, and civil and human rights. The Rumi Forum is part of a larger global civic and social movement referred to as the Hizmet movement, and is well known for opening hundreds of schools in more than 150 countries. At the center of our value set lies quality education. No doubt it is near and dear to all of us. I personally look forward to and wish everyone an enjoyable and stimulating conference day as we hear, discuss, and tease out the issues regarding the current status of education here in the US. I want to thank the speakers for their contributions, and as always, look forward to continuing the dialogue beyond this event. Thank you, one and all.
Now for our opening remarks, I would like to introduce Dr. Peter Cookson. Peter Cookson is principal researcher at American Institutes for Research and teaches sociology here at Georgetown University. He is the author of over 20 books and numerous scholarly and popular articles. His most recent book, Class Rules: Exposing Inequality in American High Schools. He received his doctorate from New York University, and he holds a master's degree from the Yale Divinity School. Please welcome him.
Thank you so much.
Well, can I move this up a little bit without catastrophe? Okay. Can you all hear me? I'll just go. I should have done that, I think.
In hindsight, Peter.
That's the power of Rumi coming in, though I would not be able to channel Rumi. Well, good morning. I'm very happy to welcome you all here. I'm going to maybe I'll just, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I'm good, okay. Well, I'm really happy to welcome you all here. And I really want to thank Emirates and Mehmet and Rumi Forum and all the people that helped with this conference to make it what it is today. And I'll keep my remarks extremely brief because I know you want to get to the program, and my job is to sort of just kind of frame this a little bit. And so here's what I'd like to sort of think about. I've always been really, I started out as a classroom teacher, been in education really all my life. The issue of education equity and excellence has always been paramount in my mind from a number of different perspectives. So the issue today, that issue today is really urgent. I'm going to just say a few things about that, and then we'll get on with the panel. And the reason that it's urgent is there are several trend lines that are actually impinging on us as a society that have a real implication for education. The first one is that we are a multicultural, multiracial, multilingual, and multi-religious society. This is a huge transition that very often people don't fully understand and see the benefit of and the excitement for this. That's one trend line that I think we need to think about. Next trend line is income and wealth inequality in the United States today is greater than any other time in American history. Now you might think, well, what's that got to do with education reform? I guess you can tell by the title of my book that I think it does. But more deeply, what that leads to is a sort of exclusionary practices, which I'll just mention in a few minutes. The shift from a manufacturing industrial economy to a service knowledge economy is enormous for our children. Just to say, I'm kind of referencing this in terms of public education. There's 60 million kids in the United States that go to public schools. That's a lot. New York City has 1 out of every 300 Americans is a New York City public school kid. So, about over 300,000 New Americans, and there's well over 1 million public school kids in New York City. So we're talking about a huge number of children that are increasingly needing to make that transition, to get the skills, both the hard and the soft skills they need in order to be able to be successful in this new economy, and without even getting into all the issues of global competition. The communications revolution is altering the way people learn forever. And we sort of get that, but we sort of don't get that. I know I'm one of those people. But it's going to be key. And it has a huge opportunity. It has a huge opportunity for all of us, but it has a huge opportunity, particularly for low-income or minority students, to be able to become part of a cosmopolitan world, to be able to maximize their capacities. So that's another big trend line. There's also obviously increased globalization, when we formed here at Georgetown, urbanization, and to some degree a shared world culture, although there are many differences. And last but not least is climate change. And in climate change, you might think, well, what's the relationship between education and climate change? But I think the answer is self-evident. It's enormous. It's enormous because it affects every living creature on the globe. So these interact, at least from my perspective, they interact with the education system in a couple of ways, which I'll just touch on. We know from the data that students of color and low-income students are far more likely to receive educational opportunities that are of less quality than other students. That's structural. That's real. It isn't just a matter of tweaking here and there. At the Equity Project, which I lead at the American Institute for Research, that's what we're interested in. What are the structural issues that we need to deal with in order to rectify this? We also know that extreme inequality is a threat to prosperity. There's a lot of economic research coming out now that kind of calls into question some of the neoliberal perspectives on how you generate wealth. It has been generating a great deal of wealth in the last 25, 30 years, but the distribution of that wealth has not been even, obviously. But more importantly, the question is long-term, equity itself is an economic driver, a positive economic driver. So that's another piece that is important to think about. I think what I'll do is just skip a couple of these other points and get to what I think is the essence of what this is really about. Many of the, what? You can't hear me in the back? Can you hear me now? All right. The presenters here, so the presenters that are going to be working with you today take a positive perspective on this. They take a positive point of view. I think you're going to learn a great deal about things that they're doing, perspectives they have that have made a huge difference in terms of the work that they do, the research, the public schools that they work in. And that's really important because I'm going to give you just one last little bit of data and then turn it over to Rumi and then turn it over to the panel. 20% of American children live in poverty. That's a lot. 39% of the nation's children live in low-income families. More than 1 million children go hungry every day. Over 1.3 million children are homeless on any given night. And the United States ranks first among the richest countries in the world in the percentage of children living in poverty. Here at Georgetown, there's a deep concern about this, and there are many activities, institutes that address these issues and try to understand the consequences of enduring inequality. These challenges can be met. So I hope this is a useful frame for you all. I don't know if it has been, but I'm going to leave you with a thought from Rumi. You all know that Rumi was a great 13th century Sufi mystic, poet, theologian. He was my favorite poet. His vision of hope and generosity can guide us to greater understanding and compassion. He's a great teacher. So here's what he said about education. You are born with potential. You are born with goodness and trust. You are born with ideals and dreams. You are born with greatness. You are born with wings. You were not meant for crawling, so don't. You have wings. Learn to use them and fly. I wish you all a wonderful day. And now I guess I turn it over to Pat.
The gift prepared.
Oh my God.
You did well with that one.
I'm sorry if you couldn't hear something of that. Oh, thank you very much. It's lovely. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll now begin with, that's not working at all. Okay. We'll begin now with our first panel, addressing some of the challenges of the U.S. education system. Our moderator for this panel is Melissa Foy, and Melissa has worked in the field of higher education for 10 years. Her work began in undergraduate admissions, where, as a side project, she worked to develop and grow the Georgetown Scholarship Program. From 50 students to now over 640 students. And 300 graduates, yes. I should hope so. With a volunteer base of hundreds of students and alumni. Melissa graduated cum laude from Georgetown in 2003, where she served as a student liaison to the university's board of directors. Ms. Foy recently received the William Gaston Alumni Award, named for Georgetown's first student, which recognizes outstanding service by alumni. Please welcome Ms. Foy.
This microphone is going to be the death of me. Thank you so much for your wonderfully kind introduction. The real highlight, I think, of this morning's session is going to be our dynamic and interesting panelists. I really nerded out reading their biographies and a little bit about the work that they've done. Before we dig right in and have our panelists each kind of run through the issues that they're going to talk about, I would like to welcome you to move forward and inward so that the mic issue becomes a non-issue. So get comfortable with your neighbors. If I could ask you and impose upon you to do so, this is going to be less stressful, I think, hopefully for our panelists and our speakers, and it'll be particularly helpful at the end when we're doing Q&A, because we don't have any microphones up here. So thank you so much. I'm sorry to trouble you. And since I'm being high maintenance, if I could also ask you to silence your cell phones out of respect for our panelists, I would greatly appreciate that. Before we kick off this panel, I'd love to hear a little bit about, or know a little bit, maybe by way of hand, who we have in the audience today. Do we have anybody who's worked in the educational system, either as an educator, an administrator, maybe a volunteer? Raise your hands up high. Oh, wow, great. So you guys are in the hot seat today with an educated audience like this. Who has a child who's gone through the U.S. educational system? Great. How about locally here in D.C.? Has anyone had a kid go through the education system locally? Okay. And how many of you have gone through the U.S. educational system yourselves? Okay. Wonderful. And how many folks do we have here from Georgetown University? They all kind of, this is the Georgetown side of the aisle. If this were a wedding, this is the Georgetown side of the aisle. Well, again, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you so much to the Rumi Forum for hosting what I think promises to be a really interesting day. Our first speaker is Dr. Patrick Murphy, who is the superintendent of Arlington Public Schools, and he's been doing that for a few years now. He specifically focuses on academic rigor and academic and course planning. Throughout his work, he emphasizes preparation of students and families to ensure a successful transition between all school levels, starting with elementary all the way to post-secondary opportunities. And he's going to be speaking to you a little bit about graduation and retention rates of high school students, how to improve those, and what a wonderful job they've been doing in Arlington in particular. So please welcome Dr. Murphy.
Stand up. Thank you, by the way, and I appreciate you very much being invited this morning to this event. I'm going to introduce also my chief of staff is with me, Julie Burgos. And it's going to be really important because I can easily go to noon and talk to you. So, you want to give her the high sign to
okay.
Say, Pat, let's wrap it up.
Got it.
All right. I grew up in the area. I'm very familiar with this neck of the woods. Actually lived in Georgetown for a short period of time during my life. Worked in Fairfax County, worked in Winchester City, and now have the fortune of working in Arlington. Just a couple of things that you should know about me that you'll sort of see bleeding through here as I share with you what we've done. Is one, I have an athletic background. So I come at things with that sort of frame of reference. I also was a middle school educator from the standpoint of both a teacher and a principal of a middle school. From my strengths, based on the Gallup Strengths Finder, which we recently renewed and redid, and if you're familiar with that, my framework is futuristic, ideation, and strategic. So you'll see that play out here. I had the great fortune in Fairfax County for a number of years to be in charge of accountability, and that was a wonderful fit for me because of my background with data and stats. I moved into accountability and evaluation and research. Everything really came together very nicely for me. I firmly believe in opportunities and choices. So what Dr. Cook, I think, shared earlier about sort of that Rumi philosophy. That's really what I see my role as superintendent. How do I create opportunities and choices for students to really pursue their dreams and pursue their lives. And finally, I look at things very systematically. So let's go to talk to you a little bit, next slide. Let's just talk to you a little bit. If we were to look out this window and across the river, you would see Arlington, and it's 26 square miles. And it's got a population of about 240,000 folks there. It's growing, as most areas are. We've got a student population right now of just over 23,000. That's been increasing, though, over the last 5 years at a clip of about 800 students, which is just shy of 4%. You can see the size of our school programs. We are the second largest employer there, only to the Pentagon. And you can also see that. I'm going to jump ahead because I'm sensitive to the time and go on first up. But there's a number of folks here that can share you a variety of different stories. let's go all the way close to the end to the line graph. And I want to talk with you about this here when I first came in, and that was in 2009 and 2010. And this is really the story. There's several stories that kind of play themselves out here. And why you can look at this now and you can say, wow, that's fantastic. You know, that's really, you know, you've done a great job there. And this is a host of people that have done a great job. This is something that's sort of cascaded itself across the division. When I came in, the number of students that were classified as dropouts was close to 13%. And that was very startling to me, especially our per student cost, which is something we look at in Virginia, was among the highest or the highest in the region based on the Washington Area Board of Education. So I knew as the new guy on the block that if the common public was looking at that, they were going to say, hey, we need to begin to look at this. But as I began to look at it, no one really knew what the answers were. Like, why do you think we're having so many kids, drop out, or why aren't we being successful? And it was kind of like, those kids over there are dropping out, but I never knew who those kids were. No one was able really to define who that was. And when I asked, well, who are these kids and what does the data say? Going back to my roots, what does the data say? They say, well, we never really looked at it that closely. Never really. So that was the first dig in that I did. We broke the data out. And while perception was, this is what's happening, that was pretty much true. Our second language students who were coming to us a little bit later in their careers, maybe in middle school or high school, had a lot of transition in their lives. And so that transition just continued to sort of spill its way out as they moved through. So now we had an area where we could focus and we could say, okay, that's the bulk of it. That's where we want to begin to pay attention. But the other piece of that was there was a balance out there of 45% that why was that happening? So why were those kids dropping out? And what was happening with them? So we took sort of a tiered approach in how we began to pull this apart. And one of the tiered approaches was for us to look at schedules of high school kids. I'm just going to give you sort of snapshots of this. Well, it was kind of unheard of that if I was failing, you were sort of doomed to that. You were in that car and you were driving to the end of the road. When you got to the end of the road, it was like, okay, what do we do now? So we adopted a philosophy. If I'm failing now, let's stop the car, let's retool it, let's change the schedule, let's also double up on periods. And so we put a credit recovery in. What I can say now, because we have very close monitoring that goes on, and there are monitoring reports that come out here, but each one of these dots, let's go back to that, each one of those dots, there's a monthly monitoring report. It comes out, I push it out to all my principals, they see that report, there are names attached to it, and I would call them and say, hey, this month you got, so-and-so, what's tracking on that? Where is that kid? Let's use Facebook. Let's use tweeting. Let's use something. Let's contact them immediately. What we found is the more time that expires, the longer you're away, the harder it is for us to get you back. If I'm able to get you right away, 2 days out, then the ability for me to pull you back only increases. So at the high school level, we did a real strategic credit recovery, changed schedules, and we had to put additional resources at that so that teachers had the flexibility to be able to provide that recovery. Over the past couple of years, I've been very proud to be able to come out at mid-year and say, right now I have 0 dropouts at this point in the school year. Now, I did pick up one last month, and I was on it, like a fly. What's going on? What's happening? Where is that kid? Et cetera, et cetera. Some of these, though, are beyond our control in the sense that a lot of those at that level have to do with family issues, where there may be some mental health issue or a family issue that causes that to play out. The other issue, though, for that 55% of second language students that were struggling, we took another approach. And what we said with those students is, how can we support them because they've got jobs, they've got schedules, they've got families, and we needed to look at a resource model, and I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about how we involved ourselves with Community in Schools, which is a fabulous organization, both nationally and here, and actually the founder of that organization, Bill Milliken, lives in Arlington, so we kind of stumbled into that. I didn't even know that he lived there, but I'll talk a little bit about that here. What I also want to talk about is the nature and the culture of things. And if you look at the yellow line, it was sort of like, all right, the new superintendent, this guy's a hard charger, we understand what he's doing, we'll play along with him, but, things aren't really going to change. He'll kind of release finally and give up on this, and this will all go away, and hopefully you will too. That was kind of, we're playing with you, but, this has been going on for a while, and you're a new guy, and you'll get over it. So if you look at what happens, we still hit 200 the first year out. And so it was kind of like, see, I told you, but you're just not listening. You'll get with the program here. We know you're new. We like you, but you're still a little fresh. So it was like, no, I'm not going away. I'm not going away. And we're going to go again. So you see the gray bar. And you see that we start to change culture. By the way, I'm not a yeller, I'm not a screamer. But if you're in my office and we're talking, and we keep talking, then you know I'm going to hold your hand. And we kept talking, and we kept having conversations with principals. What do we need to do, and what do you need? And what do you need to make that happen? Well, my goal the second year out was to be under 100. And people said again that I was crazy, and you can see in the gray relationship that maybe I was, but I said, no, I'm not going to give it up. And so part of this is a culture shift. Part of this is believing that this can happen. Part of this is saying, I'm going to be relentless, and I'm going to hold the line. And each year, my goal leading up to last year was to be under 100. And so what we were able to do is we were able to refine. We weren't Facebooking and tweeting kids back here. But as we got into here and got much more granular, we began to Facebook and tweet kids and pick them up. And we knew who our kids were, and we got telephone numbers for them. So that then when things happened, we could be on it. So this is a gradual refinement of what happened over a longer period of time. And as you can see, I had big discussions also in the 2 years here about what's happening in March and April. What's happening in March and April, and how do I prepare for March and April back in December and January? I want to just go to one more slide because I'm imagining. One of the other pieces is we looked at graduation, and while the two are not, congruent in the sense that the dropout is in relationship to the graduation, a real focus also on the ethnicity piece. I think you may have to go back. I just want to touch on community and schools. If we have stop right here. One of the things that Community in Schools talks about is that teachers need to teach, and we need to bring resources into play with this. Unfortunately, today many of our teachers play expanded roles, and so how do we focus them on what the priority is from 9 to 3 o'clock or whenever the school day is, and how can we bring other agencies into play? So in Arlington, we have the Arlington Food Assistant Network, which brings in food for many of our students and provides them with not having to worry about going to the grocery store or providing for their family. So that's not an economic drain. We also have mental health services and counseling services also for folks that if they need that or be able to provide that with their family. So this Community of Schools network, which actually fell into my lap because of the number of connections that I've had, actually played itself out very nicely. I also think the last thing I'll leave you with is it's all influenced by what's happening in your community. And so this is what's influencing my community and what the particular factors are. If we looked at dropout on a national level, and we looked at Arlington, we would say, hey, you don't really have an issue. You know, you're very fortunate. It's your kids are being successful. But my goal is to get to 0. And so that refinement of how I get to 0 has to be in a progression. And right now I think I'm at 31. I recognize that number is going to go up, but I want to be well below 100 this year. And I want my constituents and I want my folks that I work with to believe that we can get to 0. Because I think I can get to 0.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so impressed with the work that you've been doing, and my colleagues here are frantically taking notes on, can we tweet our students? We should be Facebooking our students, and definitely stealing best practices. I'm sure a number of you have fantastic questions for Dr. Murphy. If you don't mind just writing those down, holding them till the end, so we can continue on through with the speeches. Next up is Elizabeth Schultz, who has quite an interesting career path. She has worked in the federal, nonprofit, and private sectors, including organizations such as, this is really going to scare our audience members, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the U.S. Secret Service. So she has a very interesting background, and so she comes to the field of education probably with a slightly different perspective, and she's going to be talking about social media and its impact on our students. Speaking of Facebook and tweeting, it's a very relevant topic for today. She is the leading she's the leading community and taxpayer advocate as the representative to Fairfax County's Springfield District. So let's welcome Elizabeth Schultz, and we're so excited to have her. And if we could have, you have slides?
No.
Oh, okay, great.
No,
You're going to wing it.
I'm low maintenance. That would make my husband laugh that I'm low maintenance. So I'm just going to close this. I don't know if that's going to cause any problems there. So I should have learned my lesson from earlier this morning, shouldn't I? So my name is Elizabeth Schultz. I am one of the elected officials on the Fairfax County School Board. And like my colleague Pat Murphy, the makeup of Fairfax County is truly unique. We have 1.2 million residents. Right now, we're the 11th largest school district in the United States of America. We have about 182,000 students, and we are projected with the additions of students that we're having about 2,000 to 3,000 students a year to probably within the next 4 to 5 years propel above 200,000 students, and will probably wind up to be about the 8th largest school district in the country. So when you have a jurisdiction like Fairfax County that in its essence, as Dr. Clarkson said at the beginning, or Dr. Cookson said at the beginning, what is it that cuts across a multicultural, multiracial, multilingual, multi-religious society? And it's technology. And it's the technology that is in the hands of the students and their technological dexterity with it, that when you look at it in comparison to really the technological deficits of the adults in their lives, that we're on a fast-forward train of how do we incorporate well into our educational model social media and technology. Twitter, Facebook, those are the names that we know. There's plenty of names that we don't know in the social media realm. So what are the good, the bad, and the ugly components of social media and technology within the educational atmosphere? And if you look at the good, when we look at our budgets in Fairfax County, it's truly one of the ones that's facing a budget nightmare right now. Fortunately, Patrick Murphy doesn't have quite the same with 23,000 students that we have in Fairfax County. But technology is something that it is easy to spend money on because you feel like you're doing something good and that you're advancing what is commonly the 21st century skills that students need. But the question becomes, is the technology that we're using doing something good in terms of student achievement? Is it measurable? Have we done the studies that said that the use of the technology turns into a transfer of actual knowledge. We like the idea of flipped classrooms from an education policy perspective. Oh, isn't this great? We can deliver material that the kids can have a greater access at home, but it doesn't address the digital divide. We can talk about the fact that they can have more in-depth understanding, but the question is, are they using the time that they use the technology for more in-depth understanding, or do they drift to their Twitter account pop-ups and their Facebook pop-ups? And so the good is, yes, it can bring additional knowledge and access to information where it previously didn't exist. However, if we aren't capitalizing on the good with a wary eye to the bad, and we're not even acknowledging the ugly, which I'm about to talk about, then what do we lose? What gets eroded from the good? So when we slide into the bad is that when you are a school district and you are developing budgets, the question is, are we in to bring your own device to schools? Do we develop those policies? What security policies are in place to protect students and their technology, as well as an enterprise-wide technology that exists within a school division? How do you protect from viruses? What does that mean to your technology budget? What does that do in terms of the multi-platforms that students bring in? Are they bringing a tablet? Are they bringing a laptop? Are they, what kind of Wi-Fi access do they have at school, at home? And those answers are policy discussions at a board level and at a division level, at an education level, that haven't been had because we're racing forward to deliver the technology. We've got the good in mind, but we haven't slid the eye sideways to how do we get policy ahead of technology. The technology is developing so quickly that we're already behind in catching up and instituting technology into the classroom. How do you manage long-term sustainable replacement models in a budget that's already constrained? If teachers are delivering class lessons over laptops that are 5 years old and are taking a tremendous amount of time to support and maintain and train new teachers who don't necessarily come to a school division with the platform knowledge that they need to deliver the technology, now you're spending education dollars on technological training for teachers instead of the dollars in the classroom. And we still haven't gone back and measured the aptitude and acquisition of the knowledge and whether it's actually making a difference in terms of student achievement. So we've got policy issues, we have budget issues in terms of technology, then you get down to a one-to-one. And school divisions across the country have been struggling with, do we provide one-to-one access? Do we make sure that every student in our system has access to, either at our behest or through grants or PTAs, access to a laptop, in their position so that they can do this work? And school divisions that have launched the one-to-one initiatives have abandoned them because they're not achievable. They're not sustainable. The question is, if you acquire it, can you maintain it? Just this week, I had a meeting of PTA presidents in the southwest region of Fairfax County, and one of them said, we spent a year raising money to donate 40 iPads to our school, and we've spent all year trying to get them imaged and into the classrooms. So you have tremendous amount of community support of getting 21st century skills into the hands of our students, but nobody thinks operationally how that's going to work on a day-to-day basis. Who is going to maintain it? What technology is going to be used in which classrooms, and which teachers are competent for the use of that technology? So we've addressed good, we've addressed the bad, which we kind of are in our vernacular of, yeah, we know about those things. I see a lot of head shaking. And as a parent of 4 boys, and I span the K through 12 plus model, I think, about as perfectly as you can. My oldest son is a freshman at Hampton-Sydney College. My second son is a sophomore in high school at Robinson Secondary. My third son is a 7th grade middle schooler at Robinson Secondary, and my fourth son is a kindergartner. So, yes, the eye rolls. I mean, I don't cover social media better than I think anybody here on the K through 12 plus experience. So when you look at the ugly, which we do not do well in the educational environment, in the public policy environment, in the legal community, and definitely not in the education community, is what's happening on social media and technology that overflows. You know, it used to be when, and I'm not gonna pick on anybody, but most of the people in this room, that you had an educational component to your day, you had an extracurricular component to your day, and you had your home life component to your day, and you had the weekend. And there really were relatively solid lines between those. The technology that is in the hands of our kids in the form of a supercomputer in each of their hands has obliterated, not blurred, but obliterated those lines so that their educational day, their extracurricular day, their religious day, their home life, all of it is one screen swipe away from each other. And with that understanding comes a power of these students and what they're able to do, and unfortunately, what they're able to do with the social media. And in Fairfax County, we run a student survey. The report has just come out that 88% of the respondents said they have this in their room overnight. The incidence of student depression, of lack of sleep, blue light, of stress is through the roof with students. Have we disseminated as an education community and as a matter of public policy what's causing that? And this causing lack of sleep, this causing bullying, this being an access to obliterating the lines between all of those components of their day where they no longer can separate one from another, is a significant problem. The technological dexterity of youth is so advanced beyond those of the adults in their lives, both educators and parents, that the apps that they have access to and the information, it used to be, well, you don't type this thing because it might take you someplace that you shouldn't be. We have Googleized our student populations all the way down to elementary school. And so that superficial access to knowledge means that they're going to simply go ask somebody on Google to help them find the answer rather than learn the studying techniques. The more they are driven to social media and their peers, and for example, the founder of Twitter has just released a brand new app called Jelly. And the concept behind Jelly is that it's a new way to ask a question. The new way to ask a question is that the body of people that you know generally have some commonality, and so they kind of know the same things, but somebody breaches over to another group of people that might have a different body of knowledge. So you just ask. But we're now driving kids into technology to ask questions to their answers instead of developing the knowledge on their own and teaching them those intellectual and reflective habits. The more they're on social media, the more they're exposed to this. Online textbooks. I have had the privilege of doing 3 student town halls. It's the first time anybody in Fairfax County has done this, and I've spoken with hundreds of students at the high school level. We keep doing things like online textbooks as we think we're up here in the good. Nobody's talked to the students that there's a whole lot of bad and that they're difficult to use. Platform, I don't have Wi-Fi access at home. What if I'm traveling on a concert at a fine arts program? Here we go, and we're down into the ugly, which is The pop-ups start coming, they drift off their work, there is no task initiation to task completion. And what's happening in the background on social media ends up stressing them out, causing them lost sleep, and leads to very difficult things. And finally, on the legal side, our legal situation has not caught up and created policies where kids who make mistakes, and they do, cause problems on social media. They snap a picture that they shouldn't snap, they share it with somebody that they shouldn't snap, they see something that they shouldn't see, and we don't have a legal policy in place that allows and treats children as children, but rather labels them as, sexual predators or the like. And so are we developing a pipeline to discipline and a pipeline to potentially prison for repeat discipline offenders because we're driving kids through some of our very well-intentioned but not long-term strategic thoughts about how you use technology wisely and social media wisely to transfer knowledge. So I hope this has been a helpful discussion, and I'm happy to answer any questions later, but I thank you very much, because this is a very significant issue that I don't think that we're paying attention to, that impacts student achievement, student health, wellness, and long-term implications for the people who are going to be our future leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that this topic of social media probably resonates with several of our audience members who are typing away on tablets, and I know my phone is never out of arm's reach. So this could not be more topical, I think, of a discussion, especially when we're talking about challenges facing the U.S. educational system. So our next speaker is Dr. William Brazo, and he is a professor of literacy in the Graduate School of Education at George Mason in Fairfax. He's also a contributing author to a digital platform program for struggling adolescent readers. He serves on the editorial review board of the Journal for Adolescent and Adult Literacy, and in addition to many other accomplishments, he was also a co-investigator on a Carnegie Grant team that compiled an important report on best practice in adolescent literacy. So we have a real expert on this particular topic, and he's going to be speaking about literacy reform and specifically how we can best support our teachers. So welcome to Dr. Brazo. I can click through it if you want me to.
I think I'll stay here.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you anyway. This way I'll stay on time using my slides. So as Missy indicated, I'm a professor right now at George Mason University. I've been a teacher educator, a literacy consultant, both domestically and globally for over 30 years. And so I've been really dedicating my life to trying to support teachers. We have only a graduate school of education at George Mason, but in other universities where I've been on faculty at University of Tennessee, Texas A&M University, among others, I've worked with undergraduate students as well. And I think a common theme that comes through is, in spite of the great efforts that I think most teacher education programs exert to initially train and send teacher candidates out into the field, teaching, like any skill, especially an important skill like teaching, is a lifelong learning skill. So it's something that teachers are going to need in terms of support and so on throughout their careers. And so I'm going to be focusing on what we can be doing with teachers, especially secondary teachers, in terms of improving their abilities to work with literacy with adolescents. And I have a lot of narrative up here, but again, it'll help keep me focused on in these 15 minutes. So a couple things I want to say just up front, that the secondary literacy professional development and reform initiatives need to be responsive to the unique cultural and curricular conditions. Is it something I said? Okay. I just got started, so to the unique cultural and curricular conditions of secondary schools, and they are very unique. And we've heard, in fact, from our speakers already that you know, the multi-dimensional aspects of our schools, and this is particularly the case at the secondary level. And so content literacy reform at the secondary level needs to be guided by principles. It needs to have some basis for the activities and initiatives around these reforms. And over the years, I've developed not so much a model, but these guiding principles that I'm referring to as the 6 C's. Now, it's just a convenience, a rhetorical convenience, but in fact, these principles all begin with the letter C, and you'll see those as I point them out. And I think they can be very useful when trying to plan professional development, especially around adolescent literacy, which is the focus of my presentation. I've worked in so many settings over these many years that I've been a professor and literacy consultant. But I thought I might be able to foreground 3 particular locations in referencing some specific examples around these 6 C's. So talking about a program we had here in the district called Reading Across the Curriculum, where we worked with cohort middle and high schools that had never made AYP, and there are still some out there. Working with the Louisiana Literacy Initiative. Just after Katrina, the state of Louisiana had a tremendous influx of federal monies, not only for infrastructure issues, but also for education. And I was invited to be a literacy consultant, one of just a couple in the entire state, working on the infusion of literacy into the curriculum K-12. And then finally, just a much more sort of local venue, Foothills High School, a high school in rural Tennessee that also has many unique issues related to literacy that serve as a good focus for some of these principles that I'll be talking about. So let's move on here. Certainly, there are plenty of indicators of need. And, you know, we've heard about Arlington, we've heard about Fairfax. Speaking more nationally, approximately 2/3 of our 8th and 12th grade students read less than the proficient level on our National Assessment of Educational Progress. And when I say less than proficient, that means 2 categories, basic, and then NAEP a few years ago had to actually invent a new category called below basic. Okay, because so many 8th and 12th graders were performing so low on the assessment, they weren't even meeting the basal levels of the initial norms. So they created a below basic category. So we have tremendous numbers of 8th and 12th graders, at least on our own national assessment, not reading at these proficient levels. On PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, and I know this assessment very intimately. I've been the chair of a PISA Pearls task force, an international body concerned very much about global trends from PISA, but looking primarily at what's happening in the United States. And our African American and Hispanic American 15-year-olds who participate in this assessment, 65 other nations participate as well, have overall reading scores that rival some of the lowest performing and poorest economy states in the world. Okay. This is a national scandal in my view, and there's one more on this list that I consider a national scandal, and we can jump right down to it, and that's the bottom one. You were talking, sir, about concerns about dropouts in Arlington County. 1.2 million kids drop out of our American schools every year. That's over 7,000 per day. Okay. And just to get your heads around that, it's pretty daunting. So we have lots of indicators of need, and I think literacy as the basis for learning, basis for critical thinking and so on, has to be a cornerstone for any of the work we do. So addressing these needs is going to take, obviously, lots of commitment from every stakeholder. But an essential stakeholder, and we know this from some important studies. John Hattie's work I reference here is 2003 meta-analysis that essentially says the most important variable in any learning environment is the teacher. Is the teacher. And so what we need to do is redouble our efforts to make sure we're providing the best possible support to teachers around adolescent literacy so they can meet the needs of those students. Okay, so let's move on to my 6 C's. The first one is good content literacy instructional routines. Okay, and again, you'll see how the literative aspect of the C gets repeated here. So secondary teachers need these effective literacy strategies in order to promote consistent interactive content learning across the curriculum. It's a big issue. If those of you who may not be as familiar with it, it's a really big issue. People have been providing this kind of support for a number of years to American educators, and I'm working globally in many programs that are trying to do the same thing, and it's always a struggle. And so we need these good content literacy instructional routines, and teachers need to develop expertise around these. They need to take ownership of them, and they need to find a manageable number that they can sort of incorporate into their instructional repertoires. And some of the efforts that I've been a part of, I can speak to this briefly. One example is the DC project we did a few years ago. How many are familiar with Bell Middle High School in Columbia Heights? Yeah, you know where that is, right? In fact, I just voted there yesterday. So Bell actually was part of our project, and it adopted 3 strategies from the modules that we were providing in the big forums for professional development. And eventually, they even came to this point where they were referring to these strategies as the Bell 3, which I thought was really brilliant, because what they were doing is trying to create an identity around these strategies and getting all the teachers to adopt them, learn them, develop expertise with them, and so on. So that was an important way that this particular school integrated good evidence-based literacy strategies into their practices. But beyond just the big professional development that many of you who are responsible for paying for in your school districts, where you bring in hundreds of teachers and you have a real flashy speaker and he does his song and dance for a day, teachers need ongoing support. That's the only way we're really going to orchestrate change and get it to become sort of institutionalized. And so we need to move to the coaching phase too. And that coaching phase means that, coupled with those big PD sessions, teachers need the sustained support, the sustained technical assistance. The programs that I've been a part of that have been most successful have always included this coaching element. So they need time to work with these professional developers to make plans and conduct lessons and analyze what they do and refine their literacy instructional practices. I like to say in that last bullet point here that teachers need scaffolding for change just as much as students do. And it's very unwise to just throw reforms at them and say, enact these, okay? We really need to give them more than that. So I have 5 minutes left, so you're going to get one of my compressed speech versions of my presentation. So the third C is coherence. And one thing that I have found, and I might draw your attention to the second bullet, this was especially true in the district. There's this irony in terms of funding in low economy and struggling school districts. And that is, they tend to get a lot of money for reforms. They tend to have money to buy programs, right, to bring in consultants and so on. And what that does to teachers is it just makes things bewildering in terms of where do I really put my priorities? And when we entered in with our content literacy packages and modules and so on, I remember one teacher basically looked at me and said, "Get in line," okay? And it's like, yeah, I understood this when I realized they had 5 or 6 other programs they were told they had to get going. So when we think of coherence, we need to look for ways that we can work our program, our approaches, coherently into the program that already exists. And I can give numerous examples of that, and perhaps I'll have to wait for the Q&A session for maybe talking about that. Teachers need contextualization. They need to see that these strategies actually can be implemented within the normal flow of instruction, okay, and not exist in theory, okay, or exist in some abstract form, or exist on paper. So the need to make sure that as a professional consultant, you provide, again, that demonstration teaching, that evidence of actual effectiveness and so on, how an instructional lesson can be modified to incorporate these important literacy strategies and practices. That's really, really critical. Teachers need something that's desperately lacking, especially at the secondary level, and that's more collaborative communication time. That's my 5th C. Time for teachers to talk among themselves about the reforms and make decisions about how to nuance them, how to personalize them, how to make them more effective, how to study them, okay? Maybe in terms of teacher action research or using the PLC model, which I know is in place, I believe, in Fairfax County professional learning communities. And finally, the 6th C is to give teachers creative control over extension opportunities to build teacher ownership. What happens when the PD, the professional developer, leaves? Okay. How can the teachers themselves create the sustainability that's needed, the endemic nature of these reforms? How can that happen? And again, I think it happens when teachers are given opportunities to decide the future, to plan and make some changes that are important for the future. So just in summary then, I just wanted to say that my notion of these 6 C's are reminders of the multidimensionality of educational reform, and particularly adolescent literacy reform. And it requires persistent effort. It requires sensitivity to the daily exigencies of teachers and students. And it has as the ultimate goal, of course, this building capacity, because professional developers will not be around forever. They're going to leave, even after a year or two, if that's how many resources are available to keep them around. And so the teachers and the institutions and the schools have to own these. Okay, thanks a lot. I have a few resources here if you want to consult them that would give you some additional information from some of the things that I've written. Thank you very much.
Yet another interesting topic, and certainly challenges to address within literacy for our students, and what could be really more important when it comes to education. And I'm just thinking we have a number of students, including one in the audience today, a senior who's going into Teach for America. I saw him frantically taking down notes that hopefully some of the 6 C's will be useful when he goes out into a public school in Denver. Our next speaker is Dr. Rosa Aronson, who is the Executive Director of TESOL International Association. And TESOL is formerly known as the Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages. She's a former Fulbright exchange teacher. She's bilingual in French and English. She's lived on 3 continents. She has 26 years of experience in education and nonprofit association management, and her interests include issues of poverty, diversity, and inclusion. She's going to be speaking about the children of immigrant families, specifically within the educational system. So please welcome Dr. Aronson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. How many of you are bilingual in this? Wonderful. This is great. This is absolutely great. Thank you. So in my short time here, I'm going to address, first of all, the needs of what we call English language learners in the United States. And secondly, how well they fare in our education system. And third, some proposed solutions. But first, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my association, TESOL International Association. How many of you are familiar with it? Okay. It's a professional membership organization. We represent English as a second language teachers, English as a foreign language teachers, so we are global, but 2/3 of our members are US-based. And I actually started out my career as an English as a foreign language in France. I taught English. And in the United States, of course, we represent ESL experts, but also researchers, students, people who are all working to advance excellence in English language teaching for speakers of other languages. And one of the main areas of expertise we have in the associations is that we have created standards, standards of proficiency for students, but also standards of quality for English language teachers. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about standards at some point. As an association, we haven't taken an official position on the Common Core state standards, but we think there is a lot of potential attached to this initiative if we provide enough support to our teachers. So I'll talk a little about that. So what do we know about English language learners, also known as English learners or even ELs, we call them sometimes? We know that they are the fastest growing population in K-12 public schools in the United States. You've heard it from my colleagues on the panel. There's nothing new there, but it's really, what's really surprising is the speed at which this population is growing. Currently, 1 in 10 students is an English language learner. By 2015, we will have 10 million. By 2020, 1 in 4 children in K-12 schools will be Hispanic. And I'll go back to that because there is a tendency in the general population to conflate Hispanics and English language learners, and that's not necessarily so. And there is another tendency that we try to fight at TESOL, and that is that English language learners are often seen as one homogeneous group and treated as such. And what we are saying is it's a very diverse group. It has high income families, low income families. The majority of them are Hispanic, but there are hundreds of nationalities represented and languages represented among English language learners. And what we also know about this population is that they are unfortunately behind their peers in terms of their educational proficiency. And what you're seeing on this slide is the results on the NAEP test, which was referenced a little earlier. There's a 21-point gap in 4th grade math between white and Hispanic students. 8th grade mathematics, the gap increases to 26 points. And then in reading, we have a 25-point gap, and it actually decreases a little bit to 24 points with 8th grade reading. And my colleague talked a lot about literacy, and that issue really merges with English language learner issues. We also know there's a huge gap in the high school graduation rate. This slide shows that on average, we have a 72.7% high school graduation rate among all students, but among Hispanic students, that level drops down to 63%. And the next slide is interesting in the sense that it shows how many students attend high poverty schools. And you can see that Hispanic and Black students are overrepresented in high poverty schools, and that's it's a tragedy, because not only are they concentrated in those schools, but also because we know that teachers in high poverty schools tend to be the least experienced and have received the least professional development. So it works against them twice. And the next slide shows what kind of skills will be needed in what we call the 21st century skills. What are those skills that are needed? Obviously, we need high expectations for all, but why? Because we need a highly educated workforce. Many of the jobs that will be offered by the time those students come out of high schools or college are unknown at this time. So many of the jobs will be new. So we need a workforce that is very flexible and technology savvy. We heard about that, and have very strong communication skills, because now we don't only communicate within states or within the United States, but globally. And that knowledge of other cultures and other ways of doing things is becoming very important in the 21st century. And of course, multilingualism is important, because as you increase communications across countries and continents, knowing another language is really important. And unfortunately, that's an aspect of English language learners that we don't normally praise. We tend to see them in a deficit model. Oh, they need to speak English. Of course they do. But everybody needs to know another language. And transferable skills, as I said. So I want to talk a little bit about the Common Core State Standards, because right now this is something that is being discussed a lot in educational circles. It came, it's not a federal policy, as some may think. It's a state-led initiative, and we feel that it holds a lot of promise for English learners. Why would it? Since there is an achievement gap. It does because, for the first time perhaps, English language learners may have an opportunity to show their skills and their knowledge and what they can demonstrate, because English language, the lack of English language skills, it does not equate to cognitive skills. Just because you don't know a language perfectly doesn't mean you don't have the skills to learn. So we support this, but we also recognize that teachers, as my colleagues have said before, have not been brought into the conversation early enough. And so right now, they are asked to implement a policy that few understand. Just in a nutshell, the Common Core State Standards is different from other initiatives in that it really stresses the complexity and deep thinking and research thinking, and really values argumentations and really thinking deep instead of memorizing knowledge. And so in the old paradigm, as seen in this slide, you see that for English language learners, we taught language we taught the structures of the language, and then we taught the content. And so there was a very small intersection between the two. In the Common Core state standards, if it works, we're going to see a much bigger intersection between language and content. And that's actually good news for English learners, because it means they don't necessarily have to have excellent English language skills in order to present their ideas, but you do that, you sharpen your English language skills as you acquire content, and that's the big shift. So what does this mean for us and for educators? It means a very different approach to English language learners, but also to teaching in general. In the Common Core state standards, we think that the English as a second language experts will play a very important role. Unfortunately, too many content area teachers still think, I teach math. I don't teach the language of math. Well, in the Common Core state standards, it's going to have to happen. So the English as a second language teacher can actually help content area teachers in doing so. So this collaboration piece that has been explained before is really becoming crucial. We need to really take a step back and look at English language learners in a very different way, and as bringing strengths to the classroom. They have had experiences, they know a language that others don't, so they bring something to the table, and it's up to educators to really bring that forth. And we also think that English as a second language teachers will also need to sharpen their skills, because too often they have been in this mode of only teaching language, the mechanics of the language. Well, the mechanics and the content need to be taught at the same time. This is not going to be easy. But I want to quote Bob Sutton from Stanford University, who said in one of his lectures, take the path of most resistance as opposed to least resistance. It's something we can do together, and I will leave you with his wise words. Thank you.
So we had some phenomenal distinguished speakers and experts here today. I'm sure you guys are burning with questions. We have 15 minutes for questions, so it's up to the audience. Please, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and where you're coming from, and then, say your question if you don't mind standing. You're first.
My name is Al Holman, and I have a question for Dr. Murphy. I'm a retired teacher. I don't think teachers ever quit teaching. I love coming to these kinds of things. I've taught many different schools, and credit recovery is something that really bothers me as a teacher. I have a good friend that I taught with for years, was just telling me the other day, we're getting our credit recovery emails now. The principal wants to make sure that we keep our statistics up for the graduation rate. I taught English, reading, and foreign languages, and I think every good teacher here would say that one day missed in their class is a big deal. And one thing I learned early on as a teacher is that children want to be at school because that's where everything's happening. And if they're not there, that's a problem. The best experience I had in school was the 8 years that I taught at Banneker High School in D.C. in the pre-Fenty Michelle Reed days, when it was a school that the founders of the school were still there, and they held to our program, and they just said, administrations change, we don't. We have values. And the one thing they did so well is that at least one administrator and a hired attendance person was there to greet the children. And immediately, attendance was always taken, and parents were called every day if they weren't there. And of course, there were a lot of single parent households, a lot of kids with issues, and the kinds of issues kids have, we all know when we were kids, they're all over the map. And people were on them instantly. attendance was the most important part of the day. Why? Because the kids had to be there, and if they weren't, something was going on that's not good. And the teachers, the administrators, many times would even go to the homes when there was a pattern developing of going, we've got to get to the bottom of this. And it was absolutely amazing the kinds of things that would get learned and how the faculty as a group would deal with it early on. And so that it's right from the start of the freshman year is that you have a job here, you show up on time, you're not tardy to your classes, everybody was on the same page, and attendance was never an issue. It was a way to find out those problems. The girl that's pregnant, so she doesn't want to come to school, a kid who was bullied, a girl that didn't feel she had good enough clothes and she felt it was inappropriate to come to school in my shabby clothes, I'm too embarrassed. I mean, the kinds of things that are important to kids that as adults, you know, a lot of times we don't think about it. We go, yeah, you know, I was a kid once. And what are those kids getting into? And so attendance is so important. People say truancy, it's a crime. Police don't have time for doing this. I mean, sometimes you have to call the police because it's a huge problem.
Right.
But you have to address it early, not late.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. No, I thank you so much, and I think you point to certainly the heart of what Dr. Murphy was talking about, which is attendance at schools is critical. So I think hearing from a teacher for life's perspective on that is certainly interesting. And Dr. Murphy, do you want to respond to the question about credit recovery?
Well, I think you bring up some interesting points. We did, which I didn't point out in my presentation, we did quite a bit of research. We worked with actually Clemson University, and we had them come in actually twice. We had also a task force of community members and of teachers that looked at the issues around some of the data that I shared with you. So it was a collective practice, but then with my background in evaluation, I wanted someone to come in who was objective, that didn't know the landscape of Arlington or know our issues, and really be able to point out some areas that maybe we weren't going to look as closely at. That came out of the University of Clemson. We also worked with George Washington University. And what you're referring to, I believe, is the ABCs, which is relatively well known in the area of dropout prevention. So while I've sort of just skimmed off the top and given you sort of the bright spots, we are looking at this, how it systematically rolls down into the middle school and also the elementary school. But again, looking at the sweet spots where we have some of those issues, you know, attendance is not, while it is prevalent among the kids that are dropping out, it is not really a big issue in Arlington. We have, you know, 98% of our kids. So remember, I was talking earlier about nationally how this looks and then how this looks in Arlington. The two things look very different. The only other aspect that I'll sort of chime in here on is my philosophy, and I think we see this, is we get through to a certain point in the year. If kids are failing, and this is a result of really our system of education that we have right now, we've just said, well, we just keep on going, you know. Too bad, you got to make it to June and go to summer school. Well, if we can do something to change what I call the trajectory of students and set them up to be successful, I think that's the idea around the credit recovery. And to scale that for you, I think in Arlington, we're probably talking about somewhere between 10 and 20 kids across 3 comprehensive high schools. So it is, I was trying to just outline with you, we sort of parse these pieces apart to sort of then focus or target what strategies might work best for them.
Yeah, the question just behind you.
I'm Eileen Kugler, and I work with diverse schools and workplaces on creating strong, inclusive environments. And I want to talk for a minute, or I want you to talk for a minute about the issue of technology. And Dr. Murphy, I was really excited to hear you say you're actually using the technology that the kids are using and trying to reach them. I have 2 questions related to that. Because I do think educators tend to, because many are too old to have grown up with it, they're not the natives. You're not people who like our kids, who feel totally comfortable with it. So we tend to look at the bad and the ugly, not the good. So The first question I have is, since the issue of English language learning has come up, and it seems to be a target audience, and there is an connection problem, are those kids that you're trying to reach through social media the ones that have the expensive computers and their pillows at night? Do they have the access to it? Do they have Wi-Fi at home? So is that a piece of it? And the second is sort of to deal with what Elizabeth was saying. Does Arlington have a whole policy of how technology is being used, both for dropout prevention, as a way to engage students in a different way?
By the way, I make my chief of staff very nervous when I reach in my pocket and pull out my iPhone. So I just want her not to have apoplexy right now, because I am going to reach in my pocket and bring out my iPhone. But we ran a technology survey when I first got there. And what we found in Arlington, after looking at sort of the spectrum of things, that most interesting, everyone has technology in their home in the way of a television, and we have cable TV. So we looked at that as a communication tool that we could use. We also found that a very small portion of our population did not have any technology in their homes. So that's how we adopted our technology, the laptop initiative, where we began to push out many of our refurbished pieces of equipment to target those specific students and provide them. I really worked hard also to provide internet access, but that got into a whole big basket of issues that I just wasn't able to really tackle at this point in time. That was about the time that Comcast came out with their special deal about $9.99, and if folks wanted to access that particular technology. We do have policies because we've come late to the game with the Facebooks and the Twitters, and I know, having worked in Fairfax, they had many of those things before Arlington had them. But we've been very cautious about that as far as the types of access, because we are concerned about the different things that could happen, and we want to make sure that we have mechanisms in place so we can at least be effective with that. With, I think, the students specifically, what strategies we've used a lot of virtual Virginia, or we've used a lot of online courses, and that's allowed flexibility and kids to have choices. So if they want to take courses out of schedule or off sequence or not during the normal day, I think that's a big piece of it. You may have seen that we've tried to push out a small laptop initiative. That's really devised behind the idea of literacy that one of the panel members spoke to. That's also about increasing the school day. There is a wonderful video I would ask for you, and we can pass it along to you, that we've done recently in sort of advocating for this enhanced instructional day. And the young man in the video says, Mrs. Hale, I can take you home with me. You're right here. And that is neat, and that's really what we're trying to do, is increase the instructional time. Again, the flipped classroom is the example that we used here. And we're not talking about magnitudes of time. We're talking about bites of instruction in 15 to 30-minute segments. And by the way, I think the research says that's the best way we learn. We should not have these huge blocks of time, but instruction should be in small little bites that we can digest. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Again, I think we're a little bit of a unique community in the sense that 90% of our families do have some type of technology. Interestingly, you may want to look at some of the Pew research that recently came out. The Hispanic population, over 80% of them have some type of device of this nature or better that they utilize. However, this is the primary device, so they don't have the desktop or the laptop. So there are certain limitations with things like that. And as you can see, my chief has made it through all of that and has a blast.
And I'll just follow up. We too have done the research on the digital divide in Fairfax, and we're at about 6% of the population. But one of the questions that we haven't ascertained is what Dr. Murphy was talking about. Is one, not having Wi-Fi in the home doesn't mean they don't have access to technology. Two, nobody's ascertained that there may be families that actually don't want the technology in the home, that they are trying to create like a bifurcated day where, you know, it's not invasive into, you know, their family time. And so there are those that keep it at bay intentionally. And so then the question becomes on the literacy, whether it's English language literacy or just general literacy efforts, it is in some ways, does this high compunction need of students to gravitate off of, you know, tasks like, you know, an educational model onto, you know, the social side with that blurred line, does it actually end up impeding literacy? You know, if they're learning to communicate in 140 characters at a time, are you doing sentence structure? Are you doing grammar? Are you doing spelling? Or are we teaching them that it basically doesn't matter anymore? You know, as long as you can get your thought across in however many, you know, letters you can compress your thought into, and as long as you can search for it on Google, you know, does literacy matter? And I think that we've heard today that it does matter, and so it's finding a way to merge policy and the funding of initiatives to direct curriculum-centered spending as opposed to technology for the sake of technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. In the red, and we have time for 2 more questions, so I think that you in the red and then you in the checked will do.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Roberts. I work in the central office at DCPS, and I have a question for Dr. Murphy. So I know one of the things you were talking about with dropouts was that there were family issues that played into that. So my curiosity is, what is Arlington doing to prepare principals and teachers to work more effectively to engage parents in a partnership to help that dropout rate, or maybe get some of the things that you're not doing in whatever process you're using now?
Actually, we're copying some of the things that you folks are doing around academic planning. So I know that you folks have done quite a bit around academic planning. So what we're trying to do is be proactive in the same nature that I've seen DCPS do with their middle schools, is getting families to come in and plan for a community, set goals, think about post-secondary education. There is a requirement in Virginia that we do that at the secondary level, middle school, and beyond. But we pushed that down to our pre-K and tried to start those conversations with parents as early as even before they enter our school division. And that seems to be the most helpful, because really what you're doing is you're providing the education, and so also allowing them time to make the decisions.
Great. And then one more question here.
Hi, my name is Josh. I am a sociology major here at Georgetown, graduating in this semester, unfortunately. My question is for Dr. Aronson. Studying sociology and education, equity and access is, of course, a big part of that. And one of the things that seems relevant to English language learners is the disproportionate amount that Black and Latino students are referred to law enforcement or in school behavioral issues. I think in some places it's 8 times as much as their white classmates. And so I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how to change that and narrow that disparity.
Should I repeat the question? Just
Oh, yes. Please.
Oh, just maybe, did everybody hear the question, or
Yes.
everyone heard it? Okay, great.
I think it goes back to how teachers are trained, how leaders are trained. And there was a whole piece that I couldn't fit in within 15 minutes, but I think things need to change at the pre-service level. So when you train as a teacher, you need to have that piece as part of your training that raises awareness about those issues. And I think it also, at the in-service level, I think it's part of those conversations that need to take place that are not necessarily taking place now. And I would say that leadership has a huge impact on that. So if Dr. Murphy or if a principal encourages those conversations and looks at those brutal facts, I think things will begin to change. But really, we should start thinking about this as a pre-service level.
And that's why I think these discussions are so helpful. Just because I don't want Dr. Brazo to get out of here without being put on the spot, I wanted to go back to a comment you made about, and certainly we sometimes feel that, honestly, in our program, where we have a board and they want to push new initiatives and new programs, and you do feel, I love that word, I mean, it's harsh, but assaulted sometimes by new programs and initiatives, and you said that you might be able to give an example or two about those. Do you mind speaking about what one of those programs or initiatives might be?
Yeah, so when I was working in Louisiana, the other consultant who was coming in was somebody named Don Beschler, and some of you may know Don from University of Kansas. He's created a lot of programs around literacy strategies for learning disabled students. So they had been steeped in this program called SIM training, okay, these strategic interactive learning strategies. So what we did is when we came in with our practices, we worked with teachers to see the commonalities among the two different programs.
Mm-hmm.
So teachers who had been teaching certain word learning strategies or vocabulary strategies using the SIM approach, we helped them integrate our approaches for teaching vocabulary within that similar sort of routine. And so that was a way that we helped them at least see that you don't just put aside one for the other, but in fact you look for ways of trying to create hybrids and appropriate integration, I guess. That's what I'm getting at.
Great.
So that's just one example, and of course every setting will have its unique issues that you'll have to deal with. But we were quite successful working with the teachers along those lines.
That's great. So we'd like to hire you as a pro bono freelance consultant for our program. I want to thank all of our phenomenal panelists for being here today, for sharing their wisdom. And thank you for being here. We're going to have a short, okay.